In an HDB apartment in Block 58 Geylang Bahru, Singapore, the Tan family of 6 was living a peaceful life. The head of the household, Tan Quinn Chai, 36, and his wife, Lee Mei Ying, 32, made their living operating a small bus. He drove while she collected fares. Every morning, they would routinely drive their familiar vehicle to pick up and drop off students around the neighborhood. The Tan family was known as a harmonious and happy family. Unfortunately, such a family was the victim of one of Singapore's most brutal crimes. On Saturday morning, January 6, 1979, despite it being a weekend, elementary school children still had to attend school. Around 6:35 a.m., after a hurried breakfast, the Tan couple gently kissed their 4 sleeping children on the cheeks, then quietly left the house to start their workday. Just like any other day, they would drive to pick up students. Although the law prohibited leaving children home alone for families where both spouses had to work early, balancing work and childcare was an impossible equation. In that era, many parents were forced to make this choice to make ends meet, either lock the door and leave the children at home or ask relatives and neighbors to watch over them. The Tan family had 4 children. The eldest, Tan Kok Peng, 10 years old in 5th grade, Tan Kok Hin, 8 years old in 2nd grade, Tan Kok Soon, 6 years old in 1st grade, and the youngest daughter, Tan Chin Ni, who had just turned 5. The 3 boys all attended Bendemeer Road Primary School near their home. Little Chin Ne had just been enrolled in kindergarten at the People's Association. Her books and school bag were already prepared, just waiting for Monday to officially start her first day of school. No one could have imagined that just 2 days before the school term began, a horrific tragedy would occur. 15 minutes after the couple left home, at exactly 7:10 a.m., Quen Chai parked the bus by the roadside. Mei Ying, as usual, immediately called home to wake the children for school. However, the phone rang endlessly without anyone answering. Though somewhat worried, she consoled herself thinking the children were probably still sleeping soundly and just needed to wait a bit longer before calling again. Throughout their next trip, Quen Chai and Mei Ying alternately called home at different times while stopping to pick up passengers, but the phone continued to ring in the empty apartment. Growing increasingly anxious, Mei Ying decided to call their neighbor, Mrs. Tan, asking her to check on them. Perhaps the children were sleeping too deeply to hear the phone. From 8:30 to 9 a.m., Mrs. Tan came to the front door and knocked loudly and continuously. However, inside there was only ominous silence, not a single sound. She tried to look through the windows, but the curtains were drawn tight, making it impossible to see inside. In 1979, mobile phones weren't common, so Mrs. Tan had no way to immediately contact Mei Ying. She had to return home and go to the market to buy vegetables as usual, planning to report back to the worried mother later. Meanwhile, Mei Ying on the bus had no idea about this, still thinking that the neighbor had awakened her children. After completing the morning student pickup, instead of rushing home to check, the couple continued their usual route, transporting morning shift workers from nearby industrial areas. It wasn't until 9:59 a.m. that the Tan couple finished their work and returned home. Mei Ying used her key to open the door and immediately felt something was wrong upon entering. The school bags were still intact on the small living room table, and the small shoes were still neatly placed in their usual spot. An uneasy feeling rose in her heart. Walking past the kitchen corner, Mei Ying headed toward the bathroom at the end of the hallway. The scene that appeared before her eyes left her frozen in horror. Her 4 beloved children lay motionless in pools of blood, their small bodies piled on top of each other, covered in ghastly wounds. The entire space seemed to have become hell, an unimaginable tragedy. Faced with this scene, both spouses collapsed to the floor in terror, screaming in anguish. Neighbors who heard the news came running and, seeing the situation, helped call the police. After receiving the report, the first police officer arrived at the scene at 10:04 a.m. Upon entering and seeing the horrific scene, this officer quickly called for backup. Very soon, the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, which specialized in investigating homicide cases, dispatched a special crime investigation team along with a large number of scene officers. To better understand this shocking case, let's first look at the structure of the apartment where the Tan family lived. Upon entering the front door was the living room and dining area, the most spacious part of the entire house. Continuing through the kitchen led to the bathroom and bedroom at the back. Due to the cramped space and only one bedroom, the Tan couple slept on the bed while the 4 children slept on mats on the floor. When police approached the scene, the first thing they noticed was that the apartment had 2 layers of doors, a wooden door and an iron security door outside. Both remained intact, showing no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, furniture in the living room and dining room remained tidy, with no traces of struggle or ransacking. The children's school bags were still neatly placed on the small table, next to a fish tank with 2 pet fish. Everything seemed normal and peaceful, like any ordinary morning. But when they entered the bathroom, investigators were immediately stunned by the scene before them. On the cold tile floor were 4 small bodies that had been slashed multiple times, stacked on top of each other. The eldest son, Kok Peng, lay at the bottom, and the youngest, Chin Ni, only 5 years old, lay on top. Each child bore dozens of deep slash wounds with blood everywhere on the floor, creating a brutal scene beyond imagination. Later, one of the police officers present that day frankly said, "This was the most horrific case in my entire career. Nothing else could compare." At 11:40 a.m., 2 forensic experts arrived at the scene to conduct examinations. Through analysis of the wounds, they determined that the perpetrator might have used at least 2 different types of weapons, one of which had characteristics of a cleaver or ordinary kitchen knife. The eldest, Kok Peng, suffered the most injuries with 25 to 26 knife wounds across his head, face, and body. Most severely, his right arm was almost completely severed from his body. In his left hand, he clutched a strand of hair, showing that the boy had desperately tried to resist before dying. Kok Hin, 8 years old, suffered more than 20 wounds concentrated on his head, neck, and abdomen. Kok Soon, 6 years old, was also attacked with more than 20 knife wounds. The youngest, Chin Ni, only 5 years old, despite being the youngest, also endured more than 20 wounds, particularly deep slashes on her tender face. In her arms, she still clutched a small pillow, a sign that she had been dragged from bed while sleeping soundly. The autopsy report from the forensic doctor showed that each child's body had more than 20 knife wounds. What was particularly horrifying was that after the victims had died or lost the ability to resist, the perpetrator continued to stab and slash randomly at the bodies, displaying an extreme level of hatred and cruelty, far beyond the limits of an ordinary murder. When examining the scene, police discovered blood traces remaining in the kitchen sink, leading them to deduce that after committing the crime, the perpetrator had washed their hands or cleaned blood from themselves right there before leaving. Police also checked all property in the house and found no signs of theft or ransacking. Everything remained intact. This supported the hypothesis that the motive for the case was not related to money or property. However, there was one notable detail. A chopping knife was missing from the kitchen. Combined with the deep and sharp wounds on the victims, investigators believed that the perpetrator had brought a sharp knife with them, showing that the intent to kill had been premeditated. After entering the house, they also conveniently took an additional knife from the kitchen to continue their attack. The perpetrator then dragged one of the children into the bathroom, locking the other 3 in the bedroom. After using the chopping knife to kill the first child, the perpetrator followed the same pattern, dragging the second child into the bathroom while leaving the remaining children in the bedroom. This continued until all 4 children were murdered. Based on the degree of rigor mortis and the state of blood coagulation at the scene, the forensic doctor determined that the time of the crime was between 6:30 and 7:30 a.m., just minutes after the Tan couple left for work. This showed that the perpetrator may have been closely monitoring the family's daily routine, waiting for the exact moment the bus left the area to immediately strike. From the condition of the doors, police noted no signs of forced entry or violent break-in. This reinforced suspicions that the perpetrator was someone familiar with the Tan family. Under those circumstances, the perpetrator could easily approach and systematically, coldly, and ruthlessly murder each child in the house. The biggest question, and also the tragic knot of the case, was, among those acquainted with the Tan family, who could harbor such deep hatred as to be willing to kill 4 innocent children? A shocking rumor circulated that a neighbor living across the street had witnessed little Chin Ni running out of the bathroom, only to be dragged back by someone. This witness initially thought it was just children being mischievous and being disciplined by their parents, so they didn't pay particular attention. However, what was strange was that despite police conducting searches of every apartment in the area and even publicly appealing through various media outlets, hoping that anyone with information would contact investigators, ultimately no one came forward as a witness. Not only could they not find the neighbor from the rumor, but in fact, no direct witnesses appeared at all. Whether Chin Ni had actually escaped remains a mystery to this day. Even more suspicious was the terrifying silence that shrouded this massacre. A vicious perpetrator had consecutively murdered 4 people, with each victim enduring dozens of knife wounds, but not a single cry for help, not a sound of fighting or breaking objects was heard by any nearby neighbors. This silence made the case even more mysterious and horrifying. Given the serious nature of the case, the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, quickly established a special task force with the participation of the most experienced investigators. The entire investigation campaign was launched simultaneously, with high intensity, spread across multiple directions. The top priority was forensic scientific examination. All evidence collected at the scene, from hair strands, fingerprints, blood stains, to clothing and other potential traces, were sealed and urgently sent to the laboratory for analysis, hoping to find traces that could lead to the perpetrator. Parallel to this, a large-scale interrogation campaign was also activated. The Tan couple, along with hundreds of residents living in the area, anyone who might be involved or possess information, were summoned to CID headquarters for questioning. The focus was naturally the detailed interrogation of the Tan couple themselves, who lived directly with the victims. Investigators required them to reconstruct every minute of the morning when the crime occurred, report the complete financial situation of their family, and list all their social relationships. In particular, police focused on probing one question. Had anyone ever had conflicts, disputes, or harbored grudges against the Tan family? Could their bus business have created jealousy, competition, or disputes? Because in CID's view, this was definitely not an ordinary murder. When the perpetrator didn't touch any property in the apartment, the motive was clearly not robbery, but revenge. Faced with interrogation, both Quen Chai and Mei Ying stated that their family had always been harmonious with relatives, friends, and neighbors, had never offended anyone, and had no enemies. They truly couldn't think of anyone who could be so vicious. Quen Chai revealed that early that morning when he and his wife went out, wanting to drive customers early, they left in a hurry and forgot to lock the outer iron door. He said he felt the perpetrator might have had keys to their house, mentioning that they had previously lost house keys but hadn't changed the locks yet. Quen Chai's statement about losing keys matched another clue police had obtained. A female neighbor, Mrs. Wu, told police that Mei Ying had previously told her that about a month before the crime, Mei Ying had lost her house keys. But later, perhaps because they were too busy or because it was troublesome, and they wanted to save money, Mei Ying and her husband still hadn't gone to change the locks. If the perpetrator truly had the keys, this could explain why the door locks weren't damaged. Mei Ying told police that when she left the house that morning, the children were still sleeping soundly. Seeing her youngest daughter Chin Ni and her brothers crowded together, Mei Ying felt a bit heartbroken, so before leaving, she carried Chin Ni up to the bed to sleep. Mei Ying said while crying that at that moment, all the children looked like they were sleeping very peacefully. On the second day after the crime, January 7th, a large number of police officers came near the crime scene and brought 2 female neighbors back to CID headquarters for questioning. Both women summoned by police were in their 30s and 40s, and both were members who had financial disputes with the Tan family. It turned out that Mei Ying had established a mutual aid society herself. This was a type of small-scale private lending organization quite common in the previous century. This type of mutual aid society operated entirely on credit between members with very high risks. So in today's terms, this would be an illegal fundraising scheme that most countries prohibit. The founder of a mutual aid society was usually called the president, which was Mei Ying's role. Other participants were all members. There were rumors that at the time, these 2 female members, One owed more than 1,000 Singapore dollars. The other owed more than 3,000 Singapore dollars. Mei Ying, as president, had negotiated with these two members many times. Although both women always promised to repay the money, they kept delaying without paying, and even when the crime occurred, they still hadn't repaid. Someone even revealed to police that before the crime, one of the Mutual Aid Society members taken by police had once had a fierce argument with Mei Ying, the cause unknown. So could this woman have harbored hatred over money and found someone to commit this vicious act against the children? Actually, Singapore police didn't release too many case details, especially regarding witness testimony. But this didn't trouble the journalists. They took turns keeping watch in many places like outside CID headquarters and near the HDB area where the crime occurred. As soon as they spotted the Tan couple or people who had just left the police station after questioning, reporters would rush over for interviews. According to newspaper reports from January 1979 when the crime occurred, one of the female neighbors summoned by police, Mrs. Xu, lived across from the house where the crime took place. CID police asked if she had heard any strange sounds on the day of the crime or seen any suspicious people entering or leaving the opposite apartment. This woman answered no. Regarding reporters' questions about the Mutual Aid Society, Mrs. Xu didn't respond. Another female neighbor summoned by police was Mrs. Fu. 5 days after the crime, on January 11th, Mrs. Fu told reporters that she and her husband had moved there 3 years earlier. Her family had 3 children and lived on the 7th floor. She regularly encountered Mei Ying on the stairway, and after chatting a few times, Mei Ying, as president, had introduced Mrs. Fu to join the Mutual Aid Society. Initially, the membership fee was 20 Singapore dollars, but in the past year, it had recently increased to 30 Singapore dollars. The two families were very close daily, and their children often played together. She told reporters that on January 6th, when the crime occurred, around 6:30 a.m., she took one of her children outside and took the elevator downstairs. She put her child on the bus and then returned home to the 7th floor. Until 10:30 a.m., she heard noise outside, opened the door, and only then learned that the 4 Tan family children downstairs had been killed. During those hours, Mrs. Fu completely didn't hear any screaming or children's crying. On the second day after the crime, January 7th, from 8 a.m., CID brought her and her husband to headquarters for questioning. Mrs. Fu revealed to reporters that CID police mainly asked about the social relationships of Quen Chai and Mei Ying, as well as the Mutual Aid Society that she and Mei Ying were involved with. Mrs. Fu said she had a gambling habit and indeed owed money to the society at that time, but only about 100 Singapore dollars, not over 1,000 as the exaggerated rumors claimed. When reporters asked about rumors of an argument between the two, Mrs. Fu admitted that before the crime, they had indeed argued loudly. She said that at the time she was financially strapped and couldn't repay the society money she owed, but Mei Ying kept demanding repayment, causing her to lose emotional control that day, leading to their argument. However, she said that afterward the two had reconciled and there were no problems. Notably, besides the Mutual Aid Society issue, Mrs. Fu also said that CID police had asked her a very strange question at the time. They asked if she had seen any charcoal sellers coming to this HDB area to peddle their wares on the day of the crime. Mrs. Fu answered no. Therefore, she felt that police might suspect this charcoal seller was connected to the case. In the following days, besides questioning this member, police also interrogated over 100 neighbors, asking virtually all the surrounding neighbors. There was also an elderly woman over 60 who told reporters that every day when she had nothing to do, she would sit all day in the hallway, chatting with neighbors who passed by. Usually, whenever a stranger passed by, she would pay attention. But on the morning of the crime around 8 a.m., she was at home washing her hair at that time, so she didn't see any suspicious people. A neighbor living on the same floor, Mrs. Tan, revealed to reporters that 5 days before the crime, that is, on January 1st, a strange man had come to knock on her door. The time was around 5 p.m. Hearing the knocking, her young son in the house hurried out to open the door. Just as the child was about to open the outermost iron door, she stopped him. At this moment, Mrs. Tan noticed a suspicious-looking young man lurking beside the door. She then asked through the iron door what the man opposite wanted. The man held up 2 bottles of something in his hands, stammering that someone downstairs had told him to bring them up. Mrs. Tan asked who the person downstairs was, but before she could finish asking, the man had quickly turned and left. She wasn't sure if this man was connected to the 4 children's case, but she had reported this clue to police. Another neighbor, Mrs. Wu, told reporters that she and Mei Ying's family were very close daily. She said the Tan family of 6 had previously lived on Paris Street in Chinatown and had moved to live in this HDB building on Geylang Bahru Road about 4 to 5 years earlier. Mrs. Wu said that after moving there, the couple occasionally argued, but not about infidelity or money, mainly about the children. They had many children, and sometimes when the children were mischievous and caused trouble, Mei Ying would scold and hit her sons a few times. As a husband, Quen Chai was quite protective of the children, so the two occasionally had some disputes. Overall, they still loved each other very much, and were very caring toward their children. In Mrs. Wu's eyes, Mei Ying was enthusiastic and generous, completely unlike the type of person who would be envied or hated by others. She couldn't think of anyone who could harbor such deep hatred toward their family. There was also a female neighbor who didn't want to reveal her name, saying that a few months before the crime, the Tan family had experienced an attempted burglary. At that time, a man claiming to be a public utilities employee said he had come to check the electricity and water in the house. At that time, the Tan couple wasn't home. Only this female neighbor's child and the 4 Tan family children were in the house. When the children opened the door, this fake utility inspector asked the children where the family's wallet was kept. When the children said they didn't know, the man even directly rummaged through the house and began trying to break open drawer locks. The female neighbor said her child saw this and immediately ran home to tell her about it. When the female neighbor rushed over to check the situation, the suspicious man had already fled the scene. Regarding the hair strand in 10-year-old Kok Peng's hand, examination results on January 11th showed that the hair in the child's hand was his own, not from the perpetrator. But if the hair strand was the child's own, why would it appear in his hand? 8 days after the crime, on January 14th, a taxi driver reported to police that he might have encountered the perpetrator on the day of the crime. He said that on the day of the crime, around 8 a.m., while driving past HDB Block 96 on Geylang Bahru Road, he had picked up a suspicious young man over 20 years old. This young man had blood on his left side, looked terrified all over, and appeared tired and haggard. When sitting in the car, the man particularly leaned against the car door, continuously panting heavily. The driver said he asked the young man why he had so much blood on him. The young man replied that he had been beaten and injured by someone. When the car reached Lavender Road, the young man asked to get out. When getting out, the driver heard a sound. Turning back to look, he discovered a section of a knife protruding from the young man's pants. The sound just now was the knife hitting the car door. Based on the accent and physical characteristics, the driver believed this young man might be from Malaysia. To verify the driver's account, police had him select the young man from several suspects. The results surprised Quen Chai, the father of the 4 children, immensely, because he knew this young man. It turned out this young man from Malaysia lived on the same floor as the Tan couple with his sister. The 2 apartments were only a few units apart. Quen Chai said this Malaysian young man often came to their house to receive phone calls, and his children were very familiar with him, all calling him uncle. But in daily life, the Tan family and this Malaysian young man had no particular connection. After police thoroughly investigated this Malaysian young man for 2 full weeks, ultimately, with no solid evidence, they could only release him. Not long after, the Malaysian young man and his sister moved out of the HDB building and returned to Malaysia. There was no news of them since then. So could the perpetrator have been this Malaysian young man? Many people felt it was possible, for roughly the following reasons. The taxi driver said that day the Malaysian young man got in the car from HDB Block 96. Block 96 was only about 1,150 feet from Block 58 where the crime occurred, about a 5-minute walk. The time he got in the car was around 8 a.m., which fit perfectly with the time the perpetrator would have finished and fled. Furthermore, victim Kok Peng's right arm was slashed repeatedly, almost completely severed. The perpetrator at that time was certainly facing Kok Peng, so when using the chopping knife to slash down, Blood from Kok Peng's right arm very likely splattered onto the left side of the perpetrator's body. This Malaysian young man indeed had blood on his left side, which completely matched the taxi driver's description. And the taxi driver himself had no need to lie, as he gained no benefit from it. Moreover, he even selected this young man from among several suspects. Didn't this clearly prove that this Malaysian young man was the perpetrator? However, another group of netizens felt that, actually, thinking carefully, there were many unconvincing points here. First, Kuen Chai himself had said his family and the Malaysian young man were quite familiar, but had no particular daily connection. Additionally, as a taxi driver, he should be well aware of important news happening in society, as most drivers usually listen to the radio while driving daily. Even if he didn't listen, with television and newspapers overwhelmingly covering the story, he should have known about this murder case immediately. The problem was that the taxi driver reported to police 8 days after the crime, on January 14th. So why didn't he go to the police station on the second or third day after the crime, but suddenly remembered to report to police 8 days later? There was also another inexplicable point. Clearly, this Malaysian young man lived on the same floor as the Tan family. If he had really been the one to do it, he obviously could have taken advantage of when the hallway was empty to secretly return home and change his bloody clothes and weapon. But why would he risk being discovered by running downstairs and, while wearing bloody clothes and carrying a weapon in broad daylight, naturally walk to HDB Block 96, 5 minutes away, to catch a taxi? 2 weeks after the crime, Kuen Chai received a New Year greeting card. The front of the card depicted several children happily playing, but the content inside was chilling. The sender addressed the Tan couple as Ah Chai and Ah Eng and wrote, "Your family line ends. Ha ha ha." At the end, they even signed it as the perpetrator. Seeing this, the Tan couple nearly collapsed in tears. It turned out there was a reason the perpetrator spoke of ending their family line. After giving birth to her youngest daughter, Chin Ni, Mei Ying had undergone sterilization surgery. The question was, how could the perpetrator know about the sterilization surgery? The nicknames Ah Chai and Ah Eng on the card also made police even more certain that the perpetrator was definitely someone familiar with the Tan couple. It's worth noting that if the date of receiving the card was accurate, then from one perspective it could also prove that the Malaysian young man from before wasn't the perpetrator. Because from the timeline, the taxi driver reported to police 8 days after the crime, police immediately arrested the Malaysian young man and interrogated him continuously for 2 weeks. This means the time he left CID as a suspect must have been 3 weeks after the crime. But the New Year card was sent in the second week after the crime. So unless the Malaysian young man had the ability to be in 2 places at once, or he had someone else write it for him, otherwise there was clearly a time contradiction. And police certainly would have compared the card's handwriting with that of all suspects, but apparently found nothing. Reporters had asked the Tan couple if they had any deep feuds with anyone before the crime, if they had offended anyone. At that time, the Tan couple shook their heads and sighed, saying there was absolutely none. Although the Tan couple always insisted they had no enemies, some people had seen at least 2 relatives of the Tan family continuously questioning Father Kuen Chai, asking him why he didn't report to police earlier. Wouldn't it have been better if he had reported to police sooner? The police report that the victims' family members mentioned clearly wasn't about the killing of the 4 children, but about something from before. So ultimately, what was it that made Kuen Chai not go to report to police? After the crime occurred, the Tan couple didn't immediately move away but continued driving their bus, living in the cold house. Neighbors had seen through the windows the couple quietly eating meals, with 4 extra pairs of chopsticks and bowls still set on the dining table with rice, a sight that was indescribably heartbreaking. 4 years after the crime, Mei Ying went to the hospital for surgery to try to restore her reproductive ability. Fortune smiled upon her. Mei Ying, who had been sterilized for many years, actually became pregnant. On October 30th, 1983, Mei Ying successfully gave birth to a healthy baby boy. From that moment, the family of 3 gradually retreated into the shadows, virtually disappearing from the view of media and public opinion. To this day, the case remains unsolved, becoming one of Singapore's most brutal and mysterious cases. Over the decades, all kinds of rumors and speculation have never ceased. But the most widely circulated rumor is that Quinn Chai and Mei Ying clearly knew who the perpetrator was. This perpetrator must have been very familiar with them both. Otherwise, how would they have known about Mei Ying's sterilization? And with such deep hatred, how could they not guess who it was? The couple simply didn't dare speak out for certain reasons. What do you think about this brutal case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next videos.